Hi, everybody. It's Heather White with OneGreenThing. I'm thrilled today to have Asher J., who is a OneGreenThing board member, an eco hero featured in my book, and also the founder of Henoscene, which is a tech company that connects brands with sustainability and also consumers to understand how sustainability works and if the brands are really telling the truth or greenwashing. So she'll tell us more about that. But Asher, we're just thrilled to have you here. Asher, if you could just, let's kick off by just talking to people about your journey. How did you get involved in climate action and conservation?
I think it's always been in my DNA to care about planet and people in a holistic sense. Some of us just have it in our nature. It's not just nurtured into us through education or data being made available ad nauseum, which I think with the internet generation, it's just exponential how much we're exposed to, and you can still not care. In fact, it actually causes more apathy than not. So I think that intrinsic sense of being connected and truly wanting to stay engaged with that sense of connection, even if it evokes pain or anguish, is something that is inherent to people, to some people, and to others it becomes self-evident as they come more into alignment with self, I think, because ultimately we are a part of this whole, and the more we come into our sense of whole, the more we feel connected to that whole. And so I think there's less divisions within you because there's less divisions outside of you as well. And I think when I started my journey, I just began in my backyard. Like I would, do cleanups of litter in beaches, or like go rescue turtles, or volunteer at like animal shelters. So begin where you have immediate access, begin somewhere, begin doing something, because then those connections seed more connections and you get more connected to the overall picture. And so I think it started simply and then like wound up being my soul calling, because the more I immersed myself in the narratives that were unfolding, the more I realized one person could make a difference and that I could speak out and take a stand on things. And as I grew up, I was always showing up for any opportunity that required me to show up. And one such instance was when the BP oil spill happened. At that point, I was in fashion. I was working on 7th Avenue in New York City, and I realized that not enough was being done for the BP oil spill to get addressed, and a lot of things were kind of being hidden from public perspective, or was not shared in a manner that could be understood by the masses. And I realized like we were using a lot of terms or jargon that had to be simplified or made self-evident, because if you can't visualize it, then you're not really going to comprehend what's being conveyed. So for instance, when we use the word fossil fuels, to actually have a visual be evoked the minute that those words are said, is different than if you were just to use that jargon and explain it with more words. And so I started creating these like visual narratives or campaigns that could reach people in a more intuitive way. And that led to me creating more campaigns about more issues. Like I just started throwing things out there and seeing what would stick, because I needed a way to internalize that narrative and see it. Because if you don't see the problem, then you can't be a part of the solution. And so I started visualizing the ivory trade, and like what it cost us to lose wildlife to trafficking. And I started visualizing how, women could be empowered from domestic abuse. And every time I created a narrative around a complex topic in the most simplistic manner, and I could very quickly share what the core complexities of that concern was, I could get more people galvanized because they got it too. It was self-evident, it was quick, it was in a glimpse. And that led to me becoming a National Geographic Explorer, and then using my visual voice to like campaign across the world with brands and nonprofits and government agencies on various issues, which then led to me having to build out strategies behind how these issues could then be democratized in terms of access, in terms of participation, and in terms of public engagement, public witnessing of that issue as well. Because the more you engage consumers from an advertising marketing perspective, the more you're able to make it grassroots and genuinely from a sense of individual stewardship, as opposed to having to be top down through bureaucratic controls, which is also necessary. I wouldn't turn away from legislative protocols being put in place.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
Because we need that. We need cooperative models between governments, and also on national policy levels. But like, from a citizen action perspective, it's important that we each do as much as possible. And I know it's easy to dismiss changing the light bulb, but that is one step further in the right direction. And you'll be shocked how quickly those small steps add up. So then that led to,
Absolutely.
yes, I'm doing these campaigns, they're making a difference, but I can't see them having the level of sort of continued engagement in the longevity of that impact being realized at a source level solution set, as opposed to just being about symptom alleviation and just continually coping, managing.
Hmm.
The other side of it was also a lot of partnerships had to be facilitated directly by my being involved versus it just being self-evident between different brand players. And so a lot of this, like missed opportunities or white space, could be captured by a computational framework. And that's why I decided to turn to tech, because usually technology can democratize access, can do everything that I've been wanting to do in a leaner way, in a more effective manner. And it's objective, you don't have to take my word for it. The system can hold things accountable. And so I think there's a lot of wonderful uses of technology. There's also been a lot of nefarious uses of it, but I think there's a wonderful, like, optimistic view that I have in how blockchain or AI can be leveraged to truly help people participate in a more meaningful manner with greater transparency and accountability.
So talk to us a little bit about how, you came up with this title for yourself, the creative conservationist, right? Like, I think a lot of people are coming up to you now saying, "Hey, I'd like to do that. I'd like to be a creative conservationist." And you showed us how, like, tech helped you figure out how really to go to scale, democratize what you're trying to do. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced? First of all, naming yourself a creative conservationist, but then making that transition into tech, because it's not necessarily the path that a lot of people take. And I think that would be really interested for folks who are interested in getting involved in climate action.
The interesting thing with anything that you do, it actually does have to interface with tech. Like, for instance, when I was in the fashion industry, I had to learn several softwares to be able to do half drops on a textile pattern. A half drop is when a motif is not perfectly aligned. Instead, it's like a circle and half a circle lining up with it, right? So it's like dropped by half its expression. And so for doing that, you'd need to learn Euphoria as a software that I didn't know previously. I had to know the entire Adobe suite in order to be able to create the layouts for marketing or for merchandising or for illustrating my garment line, And so, like, over time, you realize, like, you're on the computer significantly to do anything within the industry or to make leaps and bounds even in terms of being lean in your manufacturing, in your supply chain. So working in small fashion houses where things were more hands-on took longer to produce something, which meant it cost more. And that's not mass market oriented. So you learn just, like, sort of where do you want to have economies of scale? Where do you want to be more efficient, enabled by technology? And then again, that comes down to, like, anything from when right after I graduated, my dad passed away and I had to take over his manufacturing sector, which was mass textile production. And so everything from yarn extrusion to gray goods being produced, like, in large quantities. I mean, like 360-ton, dye lots. And in that situation, I would say, like, if you're not fascinated by the fact that you can extrude yarn a certain way because, machinery allows for it to happen faster and in a more like interesting way, because depending on how you spin it, you get different iridescence on your fabric, things like that, right? Like texture, dimension, quality, all of these things come into play just because you can work with machines more intelligently. And so that was how it got introduced to me in fashion. And then when I got into campaigning and communications, again, we rely on technology to bridge those distances, to bridge those gaps. The internet is an incredible purveyor of information in ways where I would have never been able to connect to kids in Uganda overnight had it not been for Facebook, and for all that we say that's negative about Facebook and all those ramifications have become a part of our narrative, it also brought so much good in the beginning, where that level of network intelligence allowed us to really make the world seem much more accessible, and problems in your backyard became real for me, and accessible to me. And kids could be just literally one click away from narratives I was disseminating from the United States and New York. And so otherwise I would have never gotten engaged in African issues, in Kenya and Tanzania and South Africa, like across the board, across the continent, different countries were engaging me because those kids could change their cover photos and profile pictures, which is incredible. And then I realized, like, again, every time I wanted to reach people at a mass scale for conversions, whether it's a call to action or anything, it would either have to be a custom application interface that would allow for me to pull, survey, like think about anything you do. It's all a click away now, right? Like, when is it ever like, oh, I'm going to go out there and stand on the road with a clipboard? People, I mean, their senses might still work that way, but like beyond that, for the most part, it's not the most efficient use of our time and resources and energy. And it also doesn't allow you to compact contrast data sets that you're bringing in or collate them in intelligent ways. So like the way in which tech can aggregate, sift through, make cohesive or comprehensive that which would have been just stashed in filing cabinets for years on end and ignored is extraordinary. And so that's really where like tech kept coming into play. I would always need to leverage it to make it better. Like even something as small as like doing an art installation, if it could be made better by tech, then why not use tech? Like for instance, I did the message in a bottle installation at Nat Geo Encounter in Times Square. And for that, I did soundscaping with sound cones, so as you navigated the exhibit, you could hear the voices within the bottles being disseminated around you. And that is technology. So you can have sensorial immersive tech, you can have like a level of active engagement that would otherwise not be present or possible if you didn't show up for that space and interact with those motion sensors. So I think like tech has been an undercurrent. It's just not something that we talk about overtly, because most of the time we take it for granted. And well-designed tech you can't take for granted, because I don't need to know how my car works in order for me to be able to get from point A to point B. And the problem that has happened recently that I've noticed is that Web3 technology, by which I mean like anything to do with AI, ML, blockchain, anything to do with sort of truly democratizing access, allowing for a peer-to-peer economy to exist, which is what we're evolving toward, for some reason has become elite and exclusionary, which is weird because it's to do the opposite, right? And so it's become very jargon entrenched and people want to know everything about it, and then they get overwhelmed by it and they feel like if they don't understand it, they can't use it. But here I am driving my car and I, for the love of God, still don't know what an oil change entails, right? So like that's how simple it should be. So that's really where I decided, like, I'm like, this is an incredibly powerful technology that can allow us to have a culture of true real-time transparency, where I can see, as you're moving money towards an impact outcome, where is it going towards? How is it going to be used? Is it been used in the most efficient manner? How could we have lessons learned from that, paid forward for the next generation of impacts to learn from and execute better, execute more efficiently? And the reason I leveraged it in the way that I have is because I don't think people need to know blockchain or know how to mint or know how to do any of those actions, having a tertiary wallet, any of those things, to be able to leverage the benefits from it, right? So you should be able to acquire the transparency, the democracy, the ease of use, access, all of that without having to know how it's happening. It doesn't, I mean, if you wanted to know, it's up to you to like, lean into
what
that.
You need is a product that works.
Yeah.
And something that you trust.
Your benefit that you can build trust from, right? And so that's really what I set out building, is creating a place where it feels like a Web2 economy. And then the other side of criticism that you often get in the space is it's like using a sledgehammer to do that which you could do with a hammer, right? Like, do you need to have that heavy lift? And I think that's the false understanding of how this technology can be used, because when you look at the deployment of blockchain, if you're truly creating a blockchain platform or an interface that is leveraging that level of ledger technology, then what you are building is going to be completely dependent on that being the spine, which means every aspect of what gets executed is going to be through consensus and is going to entail everyone being in the know. So nothing is happening behind closed doors, nothing is happening with drapes pulled, and there's no rooms that are convening where only few can get in. Everyone has access to everything. So if you're building on that inherent premise, then you can't suddenly shift gears and say, now I'm going to be exclusionary and be different in how I allow for people to come together towards realizing an impact or an end goal.
And that's really what your new company is about, Henoscene, is having that trust and transparency with respect to brands. Can you tell us a little bit about what Henoscene is doing and how you're leveraging Web3 and blockchain?
Yeah, so so the reason I gave rise to Henoscene was in 2016, I ran a campaign with Whiskas and WWF. Whiskers is when they launched the campaign of a tiger walking through a forest, and then it would like go into your house and become your tabby and eat cat food. And so it's like, if you cared about your cat at home, then know it has like wild roots. You should care about cats in the wild too. Give me 1 second. That's Granite ringing the doorbell again. Granite, you go to the bathroom in about 10 minutes, okay? The dog walker will be here. Come here, baby. Granite. Granite. Come sit with mommy. She's coming. She'll come.
The best is your family portrait. The best is when you took your formal family portrait with Granite and Onyx.
He's ringing
with the wingback chair and your formal dress. I just loved it.
I know. I was like, that's all we need is a giant portrait hanging over the mantle.
So
okay,
fun.
I'll start over on that since you're editing anyway. Granted, just sit. We'll be back. Just sit.
So tell us about Henoscene and how you leverage Web3 and blockchain.
So when we began running the campaign for Whiskers and WWF in 2016, and Whiskers had created that campaign of a tiger becoming a tabby in your house and eating cat food, that was a way for them to say that if you have a pet cat, you know, you still can care about tigers, give back money to the tigers. And they were funneling, I think, £1 million at that point towards a land trust being established between 14 government ranges that would allow for doubling of tiger habitat where tigers could get reintroduced. And what that entailed was also reacquiring land from farmers who had subversively procured it, you know, because there was no land regulations being put in place in those governments. And so we had to acquire that land back and then reestablish the Wilderness Trust. And the way we wanted to create social currency around the movement, which is what they brought me in for, was to empower these farmers to feel like they were not just the ones to give up land and have nothing from it, but rather they were building a new economic model around ecotourism that would center around big cats being in their backyard as a keystone species. And so I created this movement called Thumbs Up for Tigers. You know, anybody could participate, stripe your thumbs up for tigers. And we had over 260 million social media accounts participating, from likes to, you know, hashtags to follow through. And that led to me realizing that even though we had aggregated such an enormous amount of participation, there was no way to bring those same participants back for a next call to action, right? So I could like engage them now, but then I wouldn't know that
they were gone.
Yeah. It was like sort of a one and done blitz, or I had to like do, I think it was Hootsuite that we used at that point, and a couple of other platforms in which you can aggregate through a hashtag and see who all were posting on Thumbs Up for Tigers. But even that doesn't allow you to like intelligently leverage this mass towards a specific true real world impact outcome being made feasible. And so I was like, we need a platform that will allow us to track when calls to actions are being leveraged. What do these people care about? Are their values aligned with the impacts that they're showing up for consistently, or have they shifted values over time and realized like, this is a lost cause, I no longer care about this, I'm going to shift my perspective and funding towards this. And if we see those micro and macro shifts, we can see also why we are trending towards a lot of investment into renewables at this juncture in time versus doing something else. And are we completely ignoring or having blind spots in the impact space across the SDGs that we don't even realize, right? Mm-hmm. And we're not going to get that unless we map the information in an interesting manner, and in a manner that we can actually harness and build something out from. And so those were all the aspects that I realized were missing in what I was doing previously. And additionally to that as well, I ran the Tigers campaign, and shortly after, a different brand like reached out to me to run a photography campaign in South Africa, and it was with Canon. And it would have been amazing to have Canon, and at that point, Google had launched its wildlife cams, you know, where they could use the cloud software to track through all of your trap cam footage and see which ones actually had wildlife images. So researchers weren't spending countless hours sieving through the footage. So if those two partners could have been part of the initiative on tigers right after the Tigers campaign launched, then we would have been able to keep tabs on the tigers that have been reintroduced into that landscape. Again, a missed opportunity. So like, those are all the parameters that our platform now is going to enable and track, so that those kind of bonds can be synergistically developed or spontaneously given rise to, and also suggested based on either values or based on regions and where impacts are being affected, etc. So I think it's a matter of just like knowing the space so intimately, knowing where there's shortcomings, where there's failings, and knowing where we need to build from. That led me to building Henoscene the way I've built it.
That's so exciting. And just, I know we don't have much time left, Asher, but I would love to talk to you a little bit about eco anxiety. You did kind of mention this feeling of overwhelm. People, whether they're overwhelmed with Web3 in general or overwhelmed with the cascading crises we're experiencing, whether it be the fires in Washington State, the fires in Maui, flooding that we're seeing, extreme heat in the Southwest and American South, flooding in Vermont. It just seems like every day we're seeing another climate headline. Talk to us a little bit about your thoughts about eco anxiety and agency. And you did touch on this a little bit earlier in our conversation, but I'd love to just kind of put a finer point on your thoughts on eco anxiety.
Yeah. I would say that eco anxiety is easy to succumb to because you're looking at everything compounding on one another, and you're seeing this bigger picture emerge that is overwhelming because it's sort of all of it at once, right? And what you need to do instead is look at what is unfolding in the present moment right in front of you that you can take on and like address. That's one side of it. The other side of it is be true to where your flow state is, like where you're actually flowing through, and for me right now, it's flowing through this application. Like there's so many things happening in the world, but this is what is happening through me. And that's what I can give my full attention to. And hopefully that's for a reason too, right? Because it's like coming through me and to me, not just virtue of my applying myself every day, but all the people who are convening around it, making it move forward every day, from investors to brands that are participating to nonprofits that are initiating the impact projects. It's not one person that can make the shift. It takes that village. And so who is in your village and how are you building that village out, and then the other side of it, and I think this has been like a new turn of hope for me, is it took me a long while to
That's my next question, is what gives you hope? So you're already answering the final question.
Yeah, this is like an interesting insight. So like I wasn't born American. I became American after being here for several years. And I've always kind of struggled with a sense of belonging, home, like where am I actually home? And I've never felt home anywhere in the world, so it doesn't really matter. And I'm always still uprooting myself and trying the next place I could live in. And maybe I'll always be nomadic, and that's just who I am. But I'll say this, I didn't for the longest time appreciate what it meant to be American or being in America. And it's so easy to get lost in how binary and polarized the landscape can feel, right? And we often feel like, oh my God, the left is leaning this way, the right's going all the way that way, and like we just can't meet in the middle. But it is the only country that has the level of diversity on a daily basis, finding expression as robustly as it is. And it's desperately trying to reconcile towards a state of oneness. And we are often doing it in a misguided way by becoming very tribalistic and trying to assimilate only more of our own immediate known like variable, as opposed to assimilating everything that is diverse. But we're also more in a state of confrontation with diversity on a daily basis than any country anywhere. Like think about if you're in India, it's Indians. If it's England, it's British people everywhere. Like it's not as robustly dynamically diverse as it is from the very get-go of this country coming together has been that diverse. So of course we're struggling. Of course we're trying to figure out how, but that's such a beauty to it. And you can't love something in a simplistic sense. You cannot love the whole and what it means to be alive in today's world by simplifying the context. We have to be willing to hold the complexity of the narrative alive within us, even if it is in a state of tension, because the complexity is the truth, not the simplicity. And it's easy to whittle it down and say it's that person's fault, fossil fuel industries are to blame. But when you wake up, do you not rely at all on fossil fuel? In which case you have to hold that contradiction, that conflict within yourself. Sure. And keep that tension alive. But what ends up happening, and I've seen myself do this too, is that we tend to veer towards the simple truth because it's easier to hold the, I hate these people, this is good, that is bad, let's just stay where we know. But that's not the entire truth, and if you're being honest even with your own self, you'll realize how many daily contradictions you harbor within your own existence. And I think it's just a matter of finding that finesse and balance and knowing that it's okay to stay that complex and that we are working towards finding unification, because the biosphere, for how diverse it is and how complex it is also simple in how unified it is. It's interdependent, It's woven together, it functions seamlessly, effortlessly in a state of flow. And that's what we're all trying to discern for ourselves through this journey. So I think part of that notion of where true impact comes from being able to stay in a state of complexity without losing our minds, not
I
going
love
insane.
that. I think that's
Yeah.
so important. And I think it's important not only when we talk about politically, that's important, but it's important when we talk about climate solutions. And the need for us to bring as many people in, as many people to see themselves in the movement, as many people to say, okay, maybe I'm not a beacon, maybe I'm not the person who protests, but I am an artist. That is something that I'd like to do. Or, maybe that I am the adventurer who loves the outdoors, who's nomadic, has a nomadic lifestyle, who loves, making people feel comfortable outside their boundaries, and helping them see and seek opportunities outside their comfort zone. Or, there's different roles all of us can play in climate action. But I love this idea that both things can be true, that there are these simple truths. We know the fossil fuel industry is to blame, but we're also part of that because, right, we all don't have electric vehicles. We don't have those charging stations and that infrastructure yet. We're doing all we can, but we also have to understand that we're not that far apart. That's beautiful. I love that. I think that's a wonderful way for us to end our conversation. I guess I just know I have one final question. What's your favorite One Green Thing, Asher, before we conclude? Your favorite One Green Thing
right now? I would say the Lomi composter. I'm obsessed with it. Like you have no waste in your house anymore. And it's really hard. I mean, having lived in Montana, it was easier for me to be able to compost because I had a backyard, I had land. And then living in LA, you have nothing. Comparatively, like right now I'm living in an apartment figuring it out. So I think if you are living a smaller footprint lifestyle that's more vertically integrated, having technology again is impressive. Like you're able to put it for all your plants, and none of your organic refuse is ending up in landfill, which is enormous for talking about greenhouse gases and methane problem. Like that's a huge benefit, So I think if more of us can see how we can enrich our immediate community by participating both through technology and otherwise, in small shifts that are positive, it makes a huge world of difference.
Amen. And then Asher, how can people find you and follow you?
At Earth Heiress, so EARTHHEIRESS is my handle across the board. And then Henoscene.com, you can just reach me through the contact page, or AsherJ.com.
Great. And you can read more about Asher's journey in my book, One Green Thing, Discover Your Hidden Power to Help Save the Planet. Also follow us at One Green Thing. We're so delighted and thankful for your service on the One Green Thing board and all that you do, Asher, to create a healthier, greener, more just future. We're so honored to have you with us today. Thank you.
Right back at you, Heather. Look at how much difference you're making in the world on a daily basis. And not just through your book, like every time you talk about it, every time you show up for any conversation with your perspectives, it still widens the conversation considerably. So thank you for doing it.
Thank you so much, Asher. Take care.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to stop recording.